And as I want to bring you into this, the food index, it actually increased 1.2% in May. That follows a 0.9% increase in the prior month that we saw as well.
Yeah, that's right. With a large increase that we saw with food at home. So let's break it down. Food at home in May increased 1.4%. The prior month, it was up 1%. It rose 11.9% over the last 12 months. That is the largest 12-month increase since the period ending April 1979. If we unpack that, all 6 major grocery store food groups indexes, those increased over that span. And with 5 of those 6 rising more than 10%. You had an index for meats, poultry, and fish, and eggs that increased the most, 14.2% over the 12-month span. You also had remaining groups that saw ranges from 8.2%, fruits and vegetables, to 12.6%. And food at home rose, as I said, 1.4% in May, the 5th consecutive increase of at least 1%. So across the board, you are seeing increases, and some of those categories more than others. I would say that also fresh produce rose, but it didn't rise perhaps as much as others. And I did speak actually to a food importer who told me that with fresh produce, if you have to either sell it or smell it. He said, if it does not sell, they will put that on sale. And he does notice that customers go to the frozen foods because those have a longer shelf life. So that is a category where they have to get it off the shelves. So perhaps it rose, but not as much as some of the other categories.
You know what's really interesting to me about food is traditionally the Federal Reserve backs out the food and energy because they're seen as more volatile components. And yet recently, especially food, hasn't been that as volatile, right? It's been steadily rising. And as you said, what was this, the 5th straight month that we've seen that food at home component up at least 1%?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this all also circles back to energy, as we were talking earlier with Brian, because if you see those high energy prices, you are also going to see high food prices because of transportation costs, because of packaging costs. And we know this. I mean, these companies are all saying that input costs are higher.
And just to be clear here, I mean, the reason why the Fed historically has said we don't look at food and energy prices is because there's a lot of volatility that's often associated with things that are completely out of the Federal Reserve's control, acts of God, if you will, natural disasters.
In the case of
but also,
Russia, Ukraine.
when you think about chicken prices and eggs, I know, Sazi, I'm not trying to...
I keep bringing it up. I'm always crazy until these things actually happen.
A big reason for why eggs went up specifically in April, up about 10%, is because there was a bird flu. There were a lot of chickens that were dying. That has nothing to do with Fed policy.
You mean Jay Powell doesn't have a cure for the bird
apparently,
flu?
There's no liquidity facility for chickens, at least from the Fed. But, that's a reason why they try to look through those things because, if there's a hurricane that wipes out, certain types of industries that are energy related in the Gulf, or if there's a drought that happens in the Midwest that affects ag, they want to look through those things. But right now, as to Inez's point, if the reason for why other types of food categories are going up, which it's not bird flu, but it is indeed the case that higher gas prices and higher types of energy costs, supply chain issues that might have to do with labor, which is kind of an issue that the Fed can deal with, then that's the reason why you're seeing shipping and labor costs go up, which is pushing everything higher as well.
Right, and on the shipping and even broader supply chain front, we've seen the USDA even initiate some more of their spending actions that they're going to be putting in place to the tune of, I think, in excess of $2 billion in order to try and right-size or rectify, I should say, some of the shipping and supply chain issues that we've seen across the food space. But then additionally, you think about the intersection that we're also watching of shrinkflation, of what we've heard from the Hostess CEO just a few weeks back in what they said is, and you may hear this more, optimizing the pack size. And for the consumer at the end of the day, how does that impact sentiment if you know that there's more air in that bag, or the size of the actual, what peppermint patty or whatever you might be getting is actually smaller?
Those Dorito bags are they're filled 40%.
Yeah, there's a lot of air in that.
There's a lot of air in there.
Right. And so all of that considered, I mean, that's exactly what we're also seeing at the same prices, but we're seeing higher prices month over month and year over year for food costs. It's also coming with that realization of a smaller pack size, too.
Yeah, one more thing I wanted to mention that was sort of interesting. Janet Yellen spoke yesterday at a New York Times event, and she said it's not corporate greed that is fanning inflation, which is something that some politicians have been pointing the finger at. So I just thought that was interesting, even as she said she also thinks we're going to avoid a recession, which, of course, she's going to say that. But it is interesting that she's sort of pushing back against the gouging idea. Certainly when you look at food, for example,
that's behind the inventory story, right? Yeah. I mean, inventories went up because a lot of these companies said, well, I mean, these people will buy whatever we can get in our stores. So you saw Target and Walmart beef up their inventory. They're finding out now they may have overshot that. Yeah. So yes, that may have been corporate greed, but that strategy might actually not be working out for them.
And going back to the food importer that I had just spoken to just before the show, he told me that they are working for smaller margins now because some of the freight costs have come down a bit. And so he said they're just smaller margins that we're working on. They're still trying to sell, as much as possible at the highest price. But at the end of the day, if the consumer pushes back, they will push back. Or if they trade down, they trade down.